The Senate confirmation hearing room was at full capacity when the moment arrived that would define everything. Former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi sat confidently at the witness table, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, her burgundy suit impeccable, fielding questions with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent 8 years in the political spotlight. For 3 hours, she deflected, redirected, and delivered polished soundbites that kept her confirmation for Deputy Attorney General on track. Then Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett leaned into her microphone, adjusted her glasses, and asked a single question that would leave Bondi frozen in silence for 17 excruciating seconds on national television. "Ms. Bondi," Crockett said, her voice calm and measured, "can you name one case, just one, where you personally prosecuted a public corruption case against a Republican official in Florida during your 8 years as Attorney General?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Bondi's confident expression flickered, then froze. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She looked down at her notes, shuffled papers, glanced at her attorney sitting behind her, then back at her notes. The silence stretched on. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 17 seconds of dead air on live television before she finally managed to stammer, "Congresswoman, I need to review my records to provide specific cases." Before we dive deep into how this single question destroyed a confirmation that seemed certain just moments before, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. What you're about to witness is what happens when 8 years of partisan selective prosecution gets exposed with just 21 carefully chosen words. Drop your state in the comments. Let's see who's watching this incredible moment of political accountability unfold. Pamela Jo Bondi had walked into that hearing room with every advantage. At 59 years old, she carried the resume of a conservative legal superstar. University of Florida graduate, Stetson Law School alumna, 18 years as a prosecutor in Hillsborough County, and then 8 years as Florida's first female attorney general from 2011 to 2019. She'd become a fixture on Fox News, a Trump ally, and someone whose confirmation seemed like a formality. The Republican senators had already signaled their support, and even some moderate Democrats had suggested they might vote for her. Her opening statement had been flawless, hitting all the right notes about law and order, supporting police, and fighting crime. She'd handled the first 2 hours of questioning with the skill of someone who'd spent decades in the public eye. When asked about her prosecutorial record, she'd rattled off statistics about drug convictions, violent crime prosecutions, and her office's conviction rate. When challenged on controversial decisions, she'd deflected with practiced talking points about protecting Florida's families and keeping communities safe. But Jasmine Crockett had been watching carefully, taking notes not just on what Bondi said, but on what she didn't say. The 42-year-old Congresswoman from Texas had spent 3 weeks preparing for this moment, and her team had discovered something remarkable in their research. Despite Florida being home to numerous public corruption cases during Bondi's tenure, despite multiple Republican officials being investigated by federal authorities, Bondi's office had never, not once, prosecuted a Republican official for corruption. The preparation had been meticulous. Crockett's team had gone through every press release from Bondi's office, every case file that was publicly available, every news report about prosecutions. They'd found plenty of cases where Democrats had been investigated and prosecuted. They'd found cases where low-level officials without party affiliations had been charged. But when it came to Republican officials, even those later convicted by federal authorities, Bondi's office had been notably absent. "Let me help refresh your memory, Ms. Bondi," Crockett continued, not waiting for Bondi to recover from her stunned silence. "During your tenure as Attorney General, federal authorities prosecuted 57 Republican officials in Florida for corruption. 57, Ms. Bondi. Your office participated in 0 of those prosecutions. Not one." Bondi finally found her voice, though it lacked the confident tone from earlier. "Congresswoman, we worked collaboratively with federal authorities on many cases." "That's not what I asked," Crockett responded, her voice sharp as a blade. "I asked if you could name one case where you personally, or your office under your leadership, prosecuted a Republican official for corruption? Just one name, Ms. Bondi. One case number. One press release. Anything. The hearing room was dead silent. Every eye was on Bondi, waiting for an answer that wasn't coming. Her attorney was frantically flipping through notes behind her, clearly unprepared for this line of questioning. The Republican senators who'd been confidently supporting her looked increasingly uncomfortable. "We prosecuted corruption wherever we found it," Bondi said weakly, falling back on generalities. "Did you, though?" Crockett pulled out a document. "Let's talk about some specific cases." In 2013, Congressman David Rivera was under investigation for campaign finance violations. The FBI asked for your office's assistance. You declined, citing resource constraints. He was later convicted by federal authorities. Do you remember that? Bondi's face had gone from confident to defensive. "We had to prioritize our resources." "Interesting prioritization," Crockett observed. "That same year, your office had plenty of resources to investigate and prosecute a Democratic mayor in a small town for misusing $8,000 in city funds. But a Republican congressman stealing hundreds of thousands in campaign funds? No resources for that." She pulled out another file. 2015, State Senator Frank Artiles, multiple corruption allegations. Federal investigation opened. Did your office participate? "I don't recall the specifics of every case," Bondi said, her voice getting smaller. "You don't recall?" Crockett's voice carried mock surprise. "The state senator from your own party investigated for corruption in your state, and you don't recall? Let me help you. Your office declined to investigate, stating it was a federal matter. Funny how it's only a federal matter when Republicans are involved." The pattern was becoming undeniably clear to everyone in the room. Crockett pulled out file after file, case after case, each one showing the same pattern. Republican officials investigated by federal authorities while Bondi's office stood aside. Democratic officials aggressively prosecuted for similar or lesser offenses. 2016, Crockett continued relentlessly. State Representative Ray Rodriguez, campaign finance violations. Your office's response. Bondi said nothing, just stared at the table in front of her. Nothing. Crockett answered her own question. 2017, Commissioner Joe Gruder's misuse of public funds. Your office's response. Nothing. 2018, Mayor Lenny Curry, corruption allegations. Your office's response. Would you like to guess, Ms. Bondi? The silence was deafening. Even Bondi's supporters couldn't deny the pattern that was emerging. 8 years of selective prosecution laid bare in a series of simple questions about specific cases. But here's what really interests me, Crockett said, pulling out a thick folder. During this same period, your office prosecuted 19 Democratic officials for corruption. 19 Democrats, 0 Republicans. In a state where both parties have had corruption issues, you managed to only find corruption on one side. That's either remarkable incompetence or deliberate partisan prosecution. Which is it, Ms. Bondi? Bondi tried to rally. We prosecuted based on evidence, not party affiliation, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Evidence? Crockett raised an eyebrow. Let's talk about evidence. The FBI provided your office with extensive evidence against Congressman Rivera. You declined to prosecute. The U.S. Attorney's Office asked for your help with Senator Artiles. You declined. But when a Democratic city commissioner in Jacksonville was accused of taking a $5,000 bribe, your office launched a full investigation within 48 hours. Same evidence threshold, Ms. Bondi. The Republican senator from Texas, trying to help Bondi, interjected. Congresswoman Crockett, state attorneys general have discretion in which cases they pursue. Absolutely, Senator. Crockett agreed, turning to address him. They have discretion. But when that discretion follows a perfect partisan pattern, when every Republican gets a pass and every Democrat gets prosecuted, that's not discretion. That's weaponization of law enforcement. That's using the justice system as a political tool. And that's exactly what Ms. Bondi did for 8 years. She turned back to Bondi. So I'll ask you again, and I'll ask it slowly so everyone understands what we're dealing with here. Can you name one single case where you prosecuted a Republican official for corruption during your 8 years as Florida's Attorney General? Just one, Ms. Bondi. Give us one name. Bondi sat in silence. Her earlier confidence completely evaporated. Her attorney had stopped passing notes, apparently realizing there was no good answer to give. The Republican senators who'd been her strongest supporters were now avoiding eye contact. The Democrats were leaning forward, sensing blood in the water. After another long pause, Bondi finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I would need to review my records to provide specific cases. You need to review your records? Crockett's voice dripped with disbelief. You've been preparing for this confirmation for weeks. You knew you'd be asked about your prosecutorial record. You came here with statistics about drug convictions, conviction rates, crime reduction. But you need to review your records to name a single Republican you prosecuted for corruption? She let that sink in before continuing. Let me make this easier for you. I've reviewed your records. All of them. Every press release. Every case file that's publicly available. Every annual report from your office. Would you like to know what I found? Bondi said nothing, knowing the answer was coming whether she wanted it or not. 0, Crockett said, the word hanging in the air like an indictment. 0 Republicans prosecuted for public corruption. 8 years, 57 federal prosecutions of Republican officials in your state, and your participation was 0. But 19 Democrats prosecuted, including 3 where federal authorities declined to prosecute, but you moved forward anyway. The math was devastating and undeniable. The pattern was clear to everyone in the room, everyone watching on television, everyone following on social media. Pam Bondi had used her office as a partisan weapon, protecting Republicans while targeting Democrats. This isn't about discretion, Crockett continued, her voice rising. This is about corruption of the justice system itself. You took an oath to uphold the law without fear or favor, and you violated that oath every single day for 8 years. You turned the Attorney General's office into a protection racket for Republican politicians and a weapon against Democratic ones. Bondi tried one more weak defense. Congresswoman, these are complex cases with many factors. Complex. Crockett shot back. What's complex about corruption? A politician takes a bribe, you prosecute them. Unless they're a Republican, apparently. Then it becomes complex. Then it becomes a resource issue. Then it becomes a federal matter. The only complexity here is how you manage to maintain such a perfect partisan record without anyone calling you out on it until now. She pulled out one final document. But here's the most damning part, Ms. Bondi. I have here a memo from your own office, dated March 2014. It's from your chief deputy to you about the Rivera case. Would you like me to read what it says? Bondi's face went pale. She clearly knew what was coming. It says, and I quote, the evidence against Congressman Rivera is substantial and would typically warrant state prosecution. However, given the political sensitivities and the congressman's relationship with key stakeholders, recommend deferring to federal authorities. Political sensitivities, Ms. Bondi. Key stakeholders. That's your own deputy saying you didn't prosecute because of politics. The hearing room erupted. Democratic senators were demanding copies of the memo. Republican senators were calling for a recess. The chairman was banging his gavel trying to restore order. But through it all, Bondi sat frozen, unable to respond to the documentary evidence of her partisan prosecution. When order was finally restored, Crockett delivered her final blow. Ms. Bondi, you're nominated to be Deputy Attorney General of the United States. You're asking us to trust you with federal law enforcement. But you've shown us exactly what you'll do with that power. You'll protect your political allies and prosecute your political enemies. You'll turn the Justice Department into a partisan weapon. And that's why this nomination must be rejected. She closed her folder and leaned back. I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Bondi's record speaks for itself. 8 years, 0 Republican prosecutions, 19 Democratic prosecutions. The numbers don't lie, even if Ms. Bondi does. The aftermath was immediate and devastating. Within seconds of Crockett finishing, clips were already going viral. 0 Republicans became a trending hashtag within minutes. The 17 seconds of silence after Crockett's initial question was played on loop on every news channel. The memo revelation dominated cable news cheerings. Republican senators who had arrived at the hearing ready to rubber stamp Bondi's confirmation were now huddling in emergency meetings. 3 moderate Republicans immediately announced they had serious concerns that needed to be addressed. The White House was reportedly furious that this pattern hadn't been discovered in vetting. Legal experts were unanimous in their assessment. This is the most devastating single question I've ever seen in a confirmation hearing, said a Harvard law professor on CNN. Crockett didn't just expose bias, she exposed systematic corruption of the prosecutorial function. No attorney general can survive that. Conservative media tried to spin it as a partisan attack, but even they struggled. When the evidence is that clear, when the pattern is that obvious, when the nominee can't name a single counterexample, there's no spin that works. Some tried to argue that Bondi was right to defer to federal authorities, but that argument collapsed when people pointed out she didn't defer on Democratic cases. By evening, more damaging information was emerging. Reporters, inspired by Crockett's questioning, began digging deeper into Bondi's record. They found more memos, more cases where Republicans were given passes, more instances where Democrats were targeted. The pattern wasn't just clear, it was overwhelming. 3 days later, Bondi withdrew her nomination. The official statement cited the need to avoid a prolonged confirmation process, but everyone knew the truth. Crockett's single question had exposed a pattern of partisan prosecution so clear that even Bondi's strongest supporters couldn't defend it. The impact went far beyond just Bondi's failed nomination. Other nominees with prosecutorial backgrounds suddenly faced scrutiny about their prosecution patterns. State attorneys general across the country faced questions about whether they showed partisan bias. The standard for prosecutorial neutrality had been raised dramatically. What Crockett did was brilliant, explained a former federal prosecutor. She didn't ask about policy differences or legal philosophy. She asked for one simple fact that should have been easy to provide if Bondi had been doing her job properly. The inability to answer revealed everything. Law schools immediately incorporated the exchange into their curriculum. The question became known as the Crockett test. Can you name examples that counter the pattern? If you can't, the pattern is probably real and probably damning. Young prosecutors studying the exchange learned a crucial lesson about maintaining political neutrality. This is why we prosecute based on evidence, not party, one instructor told his class while showing the clip. Because someday, someone might ask you to name your cases, and you better be able to show you were fair. For Crockett, the moment cemented her reputation as one of the most effective questioners in Congress. Her ability to distill 8 years of partisan prosecution into a single, unanswerable question became legendary. Other members of Congress sought her advice on how to question witnesses effectively. The key is preparation, Crockett explained in a later interview. I didn't ask that question hoping to catch her off guard. I asked it knowing the answer. I had done the research. I knew she couldn't name a single Republican prosecution because there weren't any. Sometimes the most powerful questions are the ones you already know the answer to. The phrase, pulling a Crockett, entered the political lexicon, meaning to ask a simple question that exposes a complex pattern of wrongdoing. Political candidates began preparing for Crockett questions that might reveal uncomfortable patterns in their records. But perhaps the most significant impact was on public awareness of prosecutorial discretion and how it could be abused. The general public, who might not normally pay attention to confirmation hearings, understood immediately what 0 Republican prosecutions in 8 years meant. It was a number everyone could understand, a pattern everyone could see. Months later, when another nominee tried to deflect questions about their record, a senator simply asked, "Can you answer the question? Or is this going to be another 17 seconds of silence?" The reference was immediately understood by everyone watching. The Bondi hearing became required viewing in political science classes studying oversight and accountability. The way Crockett had built to her question, establishing the pattern before asking for the single counterexample, became a textbook example of effective examination technique. What makes this so powerful, one professor explained to his class, is that it's not a gotcha question. It's a fair question that any honest prosecutor should be able to answer. The fact that Bondi couldn't answer it told us everything we needed to know. A year later, when Crockett received an award from the National Association of Attorneys General for promoting prosecutorial integrity, she reflected on that moment. When prosecutors forget that their loyalty is to justice, not party, they corrupt the entire system, she said in her acceptance speech. Ms. Bondi forgot that. For 8 years, she used her office as a partisan tool. All I did was ask her to name one exception to the pattern. The fact that she couldn't isn't an indictment of my questioning. It's an indictment of her record. The audience, filled with current and former attorneys general from both parties, gave her a standing ovation. Many of them had gone back to review their own prosecution records after the Bondi hearing, making sure they could answer the Crockett question if it was ever posed to them. For Bondi, the aftermath was career-ending. Her legal consulting firm collapsed as clients fled. Her media appearances dried up completely. She became a cautionary tale in legal circles about what happens when prosecutors forget their oath to equal justice. The woman who had walked into that hearing expecting to become Deputy Attorney General left as a symbol of partisan corruption of law enforcement. The 17 seconds of silence after Crockett's question became one of the most replayed moments in political history. It was used in documentaries about political accountability, in training videos for prosecutors about avoiding bias, and in law school classes about the importance of neutral law enforcement. But the real legacy was the standard it set. After the Bondi hearing, nominees couldn't just claim they were fair prosecutors. They had to prove it. They had to be able to name cases that showed they prosecuted both parties equally. The Crockett test became a standard part of confirmation preparation. 3 years later, when a new Attorney General nominee sat before the same committee, the first question they were asked was, "Can you name cases where you prosecuted members of both political parties for similar crimes?" The nominee smiled and pulled out a prepared list, having learned from Bondi's destruction. That's the Crockett effect, a political commentator observed. One perfectly crafted question changed how we evaluate prosecutors forever. It showed that sometimes the simplest questions are the most devastating, especially when the person being questioned can't answer them. The moment when Jasmine Crockett asked Pam Bondi to name just one Republican prosecution had seemed like a simple question. But it had exposed 8 years of partisan corruption, destroyed a nomination that seemed certain, and changed how America evaluates its prosecutors. All with 21 words and 17 seconds of devastating silence. If you've watched this entire breakdown of one of the most devastating single questions in political history, hit that like button and subscribe to see more moments where preparation meets corruption and wins. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. Was the question fair? Should Bondi have been prepared with an answer? Remember, sometimes the most powerful questions are the ones that seem simple but reveal everything. And always remember, when you can't name a single exception to a pattern of bias, that silence speaks louder than any words ever could.